All right. All right. So welcome and good morning to the Cloud Strategy session. My name is Joel Grein, Senior Vice President of NWN. This morning our topic is demystification and your approach and strategy of moving to the cloud. The cloud is certainly something different that each person you ask has a different interpretation of their cloud. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that today. We'll talk about the risk, the quality of service, maintaining key IT resources when considering going to the cloud. So for our discussion in our panel today, we have the pleasure of 4 key individuals sitting on our panel to walk us through their journey and experiences moving to the cloud. And before I go any further, I'd like to thank you guys very much for doing this. This takes time and energy, and everybody's busy, and so thank you very much. I appreciate that. So as way of introduction, first we have Robert Schmidt, Chief of Technology Services, California Department of Technology. In 2009, while at the Office of CIO, Robert worked on the early drafts of the cloud policy. But it was so early that even NIST did not have a draft definition of cloud computing. In 2014, while at the Department of Food and Ag, as the AIO, Robert became an early adopter of CalCloud, migrating over 70 applications in a period of 90 days. This eventually led Robert to becoming the change champion for CalCloud. In 2015, Robert was appointed by the Governor Jerry Brown as the chief of OTEC, leading the way for CalCloud and now hybrid cloud services. Robert's goal is to make OTEC a technology broker of choice for the state of California. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Next, we have Liana Bailey-Crimmins, Chief Information Officer at CalPERS. Liana was an early adopter of managed and hosted services with a great deal of cloud experience. Before cloud became a hip marketing term, boy is it, Liana took a leadership role changing IT organizations to decide what business they want to be in. When she was the CIO at Correctional Healthcare Services, Liana implemented a 100% managed service data center as an optimal solution due to constrained staff resources. As the CIO of CalPERS for over 3 years now, Liana executed a cloud-first strategy whereby there is availability for a service to be managed in the cloud. CalPERS will consider doing so by evaluating risk levels, benefits amongst the other criteria. Jeez. CalPERS currently has over 60 cloud solutions, the majority of which are software as a service and one infrastructure as a service. Next, we have Jason Piccione. Jason, thank you. Chief Information Officer, California Department of Consumer Affairs. Since joining DCA in 2015, as the CIO, Jason has driven cloud-cautious organization, one that seeks cloud services first to run the majority of their efforts. He has initiated the evolution of a cloud strategy as a predecessor to a deep cloud adoption. In addition, Jason has started a cultural shift and organizational change management to ensure a smooth transition to a cloud-first organization at DCA. Last but not least, we have Joe Panora. Joe is the former AIO, California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Joe has been known as the cloud pioneer. He closed down CDCR computer room, and moved e-discovery to a cloud offering. He moved on the premises. He moved the on-premises offender management application known as the Strategic Offender Management Systems, all of us know it as SOMS, to an HP data center. Joe is joining us today as the moderator for the panel, where he will share his experience and wealth of state knowledge throughout the panel discussion. So with that, one quick little tidbit of information. We all sat down and started talking about this session and what we were going to talk about, and Joe very early on said his definition of the cloud was somebody else's computer. So that was an interesting little tidbit. Okay. All right, Joe, thank you.
Cool. And yeah, I wish I could get credit for that, somebody else's computer, but I stole it from somebody else. But I like it, because it is, the cloud. We're going like, what is that? But it's residing somewhere, and it's somebody else's computer. So I get to kind of ask the questions every now and then, poke fun at the panel members, have a little good time here, so I appreciate that. One of the benefits of being retired, I guess. So we all think of cloud, we all have kind of different meanings. And so one of the things that we thought we'd do is kind of set a foundation here, kind of ask the panel members, how do they define cloud within their organization? But then also to follow up with that, how did they develop a cloud strategy? So I think it's only appropriate, because not too many people can pull off wearing a bow tie. So we're going to start with Robert.
Thank you, Joe. I'm really putting myself out there today. It's the first time I've worn a bow tie. So it's interesting, as Joel and Joe shared, it has a variety of definitions for cloud. And I've been working now with this technology for now 6 or 7 years. And I'm going to give you two personas this morning. One first is a CIO and an AIO. So back at Food and Agriculture, I was there for about 5 years, working in a traditional environment with servers, storage, network, infrastructure team that supported all that 24/7 or like 8/5. And the reality of that was it wasn't working for us. The reality was we knew we weren't secure. We knew that we couldn't possibly meet all the requirements for security, privacy, et cetera. And of course, compliance requirements from the federal government, because we actually hosted federal data. So as a CIO, I looked at that and I said to myself, there's got to be a better way. And so I started looking around at different options. And that's where I learned about the concept of hybrid cloud. And that's actually how I see it. And how I see it is being able to leverage resources that are outside your normal office, leveraging someone else's resources so you don't have to worry about the things such as security for infrastructure. So I see a lot of opportunity for departments to consider that, whether it be in CalCloud or software as a service offerings that we have. So next I'm going to switch now to as Chief of OTEC. As a Chief of OTEC, I'm here to provide technology services to over 500 different departments, boards, and commissions in the state, and as well as local government. And here it's about on-demand, pay-per-use model. That is, you only pay for the resources that you need, and it's simply done through a service request. You can find all these different services that we have in our service catalog that you'll find online. What's great about it is there's a variety of services depending on your needs, and we can customize it being a government entity to what you need. So I see an incredible opportunity for organizations like yourselves to leverage that. Thank you.
Cool. Hey, got a quick question. How many favorite color out there is blue? Really? All right, I guess Jason, you're up.
Well, that was scientific.
It should have been yellow. Sorry.
I'll say that I'm here to represent folks and organizations that are early on in their cloud journey. So we at DCA have experienced the fears, uncertainty, and doubt, and continue to experience that. I'll talk about cloud. I'll accept the definition that Robert Wind and Joe talked about as services running on somebody else's stuff. And I'll talk about it from a soft skills perspective. Cloud in my organization currently, Consumer Affairs, comes in two flavors. The acute flavor is staff that see a changing environment, staff that experience the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and need to evolve with that, need to think about how that affects them, how it affects the organization. And then from a strategic perspective, from the perspective that I like to look at it, we see cloud as an opportunity to utilize the resources that we have and focus those resources. If I ask the question to this group of state agencies, how many have resources coming out of your ears and approved BCPs adding tons of PYs to your staff, nobody would raise their hand, right? So with that finite resource, we're able to look and focus and evolve the resources that we have and to not sacrifice services, to expand our services without getting more staff, without getting more resources. And to jump into starting the development of our strategy at DCA, I first looked at and did a review of what our profiles and strategies were in several different areas before we even started looking at cloud services. What is our security profile? What is our data storage strategy? What is our monitoring strategies, our server hardening strategies? And we looked at that first and made sure that we were tight in those areas before we were going to extend out those services to, again, somebody else's stuff. And I guess the takeaway for me on this question is we made sure our house is in order before we went out and got a rental. So,
There you go. Very cool. Like that.
All right. Well, Liana? I'm not going to be anything funny. Go right ahead.
He was saying that all the extra security was because of me earlier, so he was going to have that joke teed up. But in 2014, CalPERS adopted a cloud-first strategy. And when it was interesting, because in order to establish a strategy, you need to first define it. And so we looked at all the definitions on the internet. It seems like the industry experts can't quite to have a finite definition of what cloud is. So what we adopted was basically using computing resources and applications from other sources via an internet connection. Makes sense. How many of you are trivia buffs out there? All right. In 1996, MIT actually coined the use cloud when they were referring to the internet. And in 2006, it was actually Google that coined cloud computing. So they were referencing cloud computing as their software as a service. And from then, that point forward, many of us then started using the term cloud. So it actually started 20 years ago. So that's pretty interesting. So one of the things that we want to talk about is a little bit as how we got started. So when I joined in 2013 with CalPERS, we already had quite a few cloud services that were already being offered. So we first needed to inventory the cloud services. So we went through and we found out there was a lot of individuals using cloud. So believe it or not, but based on that definition, Google Maps is a cloud application, but it's a subscription. So we inventoried all of our cloud solutions, and then what we did is categorized. So what are subscriptions? Either you buy it by the drink or you don't. What is a managed service? And so we had a list of managed services. And then what are customized solutions that we currently have on behalf of us? And then we aligned those to the business folks that ended up using those services and then looked at the risk. So that's where we started, is basically based on the inventory and then establish a strategy around where we wanted to move forward when it came to cloud. So that's where our description, and that's how we started.
Cool. Very cool. And the security was for Liana, but that's okay. We want to make sure our pensions are protected.
That's good.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope you see that from the panel. We have a really diverse panel bringing different experiences throughout multiple departments from the state, including the state data center. So that was the rationale and why we picked these three people for our panel members. Now we're going to drill down into some more questions and kind of peel the onion a little bit. So when you think of cloud, there's always these kind of myths and misconceptions. And so it'd be real interesting from your perspective, your journey on the cloud. What are some of those misconceptions that you dealt with? So, Liana?
Right. I like Gartner's myths. If you see their top list, basically that it's less secure, that you need less resources, and that it's cost effective. So I kind of look at that from that perspective. I've deployed 6 cloud solutions in the last 12 months, and none of those solutions I actually reduced any staff. So just think about that. What role they played may have been different, but it did not reduce staff. The other thing is about, from a security perspective, I was at a recent conference in Texas that I was speaking at, and a gentleman came up to me and said, I'm the IT staff. And I know obviously you don't have to worry about just being one person, but there's a lot of departments that have a small subset of technologists that work for them. And when it comes to security, sometimes being in the cloud and having a vendor be able to patch and provide that investment and have that opportunity to hire the best and brightest, it actually is more secure. So that was one of the things that I think is a myth. And then when it comes to being cost effective, so the state does a good job on funding one-time investments. How many of you have had to go through a hardware refresh when you hit the 4 or 5 year mark? Quite a few of you. That's a painful conversation to have with your budget office and with Department of Finance, because a lot of times, again, they fund the first time, but coming back to refresh that investment is a very difficult conversation to have and actually to get the money. So what cloud does is it moves it from a CapEx conversation to an OpEx. Basically what it does is it's a consistent line item that you budget, and you don't have to worry about that uptick every 4 or 5 years. So it may be more cost effective overall, but I think it's just changing the conversation you have with your budget office and finance. So that's what I think from a myth perspective.
Okay. Jason, what's your take on it?
You gave all the good answers. I'm gonna answer it from the perspective of misconceptions from our customer base, our program users. And regardless of the progress in my cloud journey or my organization's cloud journey, the cloud and cloud services is so out there that program staff know what it is. And the misconception that we've experienced at Consumer Affairs is that suddenly software as a service are magic. The IT rigor that we normally put program folks through, security plans, implementation, project, and approvals, external approvals, suddenly go away because it's a magic service offering from somebody else. So that was a big misconception in our organization. It came as a way to circumvent those nasty IT folks that make us do things that they don't want to do. And so we're attempting to massage that a little via OCM, Organizational Change Management, and introducing our program folks to software as a service in little bits via OCM. And we found that preliminarily successful.
And that whole organization change management is so critical. You're not going to get anything done. It's not the technology. We all know that as technologists. It really is the business side of the house that's really going to adopt it. So speaking of adoption, and when I think of adoption, I also think of acceptance, because they're kind of two different things when you come to technology. So from that perspective, can you explain a little bit how you educated your stakeholders, especially from the program side, the executive side, and how did you drive out some of that fear and get some of that buy-in? Robert?
That's a great question. And again, I can give you two different perspectives. So let me first start as the OTEC chief and talk about brand awareness. And building out CalCloud, if you may recall, about a little over a year ago, we had a CalCloud strategy that was rolled out, and it covered many different areas, some of the topics we've already talked about here. But understand a big part of this is about change management, cultural change management, organizational change management. And understand too is it's not just about talking to technical people, it's also about talking to the business and educating all the way up to our secretariat level of what cloud means from a business perspective, how it can help you, as Liana shared about the differences in moving costs from CapEx to OpEx, and that is moving to a subscription-based service is a very big impact perhaps on the finances. Some organizations are funded differently, so you have to have a close conversation with your budget officer about those potential changes and plan ahead. I'll say too is what we've done at OTEC is division and department town halls where we had groups of hundreds of people, both in person and online through webinars, where we could answer their questions and provide them information as to what change is happening. And two is meetings with CIOs. So most of my role, I would say 90% of my role is external to the organization. I'm out there talking with folks like you, talking to department CIOs, talking to city CIOs, educational CIOs about what CalCloud is and how they can leverage that. And then two is I also discuss with people the fear of moving within a department. So you're moving your organization from managing infrastructure and more focused on delivering business results. And what do I mean by that? With the resources that you may be able to free up, you can leverage that to develop new systems. And that's something that I was doing, is finding ways I can have my staff doing infrastructure work going forward to work on innovative projects such as mobile computing, such as going out in the field and working actually with the business. And the business noticed that and they recognized that.
Just kind of a follow-up. I mean, it's almost like taking small incremental steps, Robert.
Yes.
It sounds like that's kind of the approach you did and got the buy-in and actually showed the success along the way. Is that accurate?
Yes, I would say as we say in our office is we need to over-communicate. Communicate through many different forms. People resonate with different ways of communications, and that's something really important. I would suggest you work closely with your public affairs office and also have an internal communications team. Because we tell ourselves that sometimes our customers know before we do, and we need to change that. Our employees need to understand it and understand what's changing. And then externally, folks need to know the value of what you're getting.
good point. I mean, it's the same concept, I think, when you think of real estate, right? They tell us all the time, location, location, location. Same thing with anything. You really need to communicate and engage your stakeholders and really listen to what they're saying. So with that, Liana, could you address that as well?
Sure. Just like the panel was saying, it's about change and incremental wins. But I look at it from three perspectives from an adoption. One is self. The other is your executives. And then third is your staff. So one is self. We are chief information officers, AIOs, and we have to be seen as a strategic partner, and we have to want to adopt that cloud is here. I mean, it's got to start here first. And if we believe in it, because I would rather be a strategic advisor than basically a service stopper. And so I want to be invited to the table. I want to have those conversations. And in some cases, and I've seen this in 27 years, some cases, cloud services in the future, that's the only way you're going to be able to get a service, if that's a service that you want. And so we need to start thinking about those strategies and being leaders and starting that conversation now, because I'll tell you, can either happen to you or it can happen for you. And that starts with ourselves. The second is executives. Part of it is about education, reducing fear, and so establishing a strategy and operationalizing that strategy is extremely important. So how you do that is what we've established is like decision-making principles. So is the industry ready? In some cases, we put requests out there, the industry's not mature enough. Is it sensitive and confidential data that we are considering putting in the cloud? Having those things of what makes sense on-prem versus things that are ready and could be deemed as a quick win. So really, that education. There's also a service out there that I don't know if you're aware of. CalPERS is seen as a risk intelligence organization, and we manage via risk, and we mitigate those risks. So there's service offerings now that, just like Gartner does on knowledge and research, there's actually a company that researches all the cloud vendors, and they will give you scorecards. Have they been breached recently? Not only for you, but for somebody else. And when you're doing an RFP analysis, start looking at those. And then obviously periodically making sure anybody you do go into partnership with is doing right on behalf of your service. So that's one area that we look at. And then buy-in. Many of you know that I worked my way up through the ranks. So I've been around for 27 years, worked as a student, worked my way all the way up to CIO. And I used to be an exchange administrator. And for some of you that 5.5 was my baby, Exchange 5.5, and I took a lot of pride in being an exchange administrator. It was my uptime. I was one of the first people that used Hitachi and Snap technologies in 2001 to actually restore exchange services. And if someone just directed and said, we are going to move the cloud and everything that you do and the value you add to the organization is no longer needed, that probably would have not felt very good. And I always lead from thinking about what's important to my staff. And so with that in mind, one of the things we recently did in the last year is we moved to Office 365. And by doing that, we brought in all the exchange administrators to work with Microsoft, and they helped be a part of the solution. Because the one thing in IT is we don't want to be historically irrelevant. We want to be a part of the latest technology. So see it as a career development opportunity. But if you're just directing from the top down, that's not going to happen. So really seeing it in three areas: self, the executives, and then the buy-in from the staff. It's extremely important from an adoption perspective.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because a lot of times we always think in terms that we have to manage up, and we got to worry about the executive director, secretary. But it's also, you got to think about the staff and your peers around you. A lot of times you can get edicts and you're going to go execute something. But if you don't have the buy-in from the staff and you haven't really dealt and taken the time to go through the process to really listen to them and hear what their concerns are and give enough time to kind of work through that, those efforts can be really, unfortunately, cogs in the wheels and be sabotaged and not deemed successful, and it can ruin your strategy going forward with any other follow-up efforts. So I'm really glad that you addressed that and taken the time to really get that 360 buy-in and listening appropriately. The next area I want to talk about is services. You guys kind of mentioned this, but really address a little bit maybe some of the, from a workload, the type of services that you move to the cloud, and a little bit more further up on the impact to the IT. So, Liana, can you start with that one again?
Sure. So I have 62 cloud solutions, and of those 62, 61 is software as a service. 35 are investment. So, the State Streets of the world, BlackRock. Again, if our investors are going to be utilizing the Wall Streets of the world technology, we need to make sure we give that to them. So that's a significant amount of what we do. But recently, IT service management, we've deployed that into the cloud. Software licensing management's in the cloud, Office 365. We have a learning management service in the cloud. And so what it's allowed me to do from an IT perspective is still meet the business demand. I don't know about you, but the demand always exceeds capacity and my ability to stay up with where the business wants to go. They want it faster, and they don't have the tolerance to wait years and years for you to build it yourself. And part of what I believe is you have to decide what you're in the business of delivering. I'm in the business of delivering pensions and health on behalf of our members. And so if we're talking about board books, do I really want my staff to create an application on how to deliver board books? Or would I rather do that as a software as a service and then allowing the staff to be functional administrators or content? And so that's one of the things that we have to start thinking about. And again, the buy-in, making sure that it's not an edict, as you have to see what I look at is how mature is the organization. Are we starting to shift from being, have more contract managers, functional administrators, and the roles that are necessary to support those services? And what I would recommend, if you haven't thought about it, is to sit down and look at your service catalog and write out what services you already have, and then determine what things make sense from on-prem, that you have confidential, sensitive, you have interfaces that are really complex, and what things would you rather, it doesn't make sense to be in the business of, like I just gave you some examples. And then those are things that potentially you could have as quick wins. So it's about doing it iteratively. Nothing's bing bang. You don't get to 62 applications in the cloud overnight, but you make those strategy decisions along the way, and involving the folks, your staff, the executives, and allowing folks to make a decision on what's important to their organization at the right time.
Thank you. Jason, like to follow up on that?
Like I said earlier, I represent the younger in my journey.
He's saying we're old.
No. Not me being younger. I was making a comparison between the 62 that Liana has and the 5 that Consumer Affairs has. So, but as the way we got started was we got a kick in the pants as far as motivation goes for cloud services with CES Mail. So, that was a good motivation for us to enter and look at that. Joel introduced my organization as Cloud Cautious. We're looking. So we went to CES, and we will obviously go to Office 365 in the next year or so. The 5 include things like secure file share with external stakeholders like DOJ and the AG's office. And we're currently looking at ITSM and app dev, version control and code control for application development in the cloud. And how do these things in my world, in the younger journey, cloud journey, have we seen it affect the workforce? I think I liken it to the evolution that virtualization presented. At that point, the storage admins and the network admins and those folks were saying, well, we're not going to give all of our stuff over to these new VM admins. We're going to work ourselves out of a job, et cetera. Well, we all lived through that, and the opportunities, and I think that's my answer to the question as far as IT impact, it presents new opportunities. Just like virtualization presented new opportunities, cloud has presented and will continue to present new opportunities, new pathways for folks that have been an exchange administrator or something like in that area, new pathways to take, new careers to look at, and perhaps in most cases, if not all, just little tweaks to their current job in a new direction in cloud.
Good points. I appreciate that. The other thing is sometimes we get kind of to this point where we kind of say there's like an elephant in the room, and people don't want to talk about the elephant in the room. And it's kind of that nasty word where it's talked about like outsourcing. And so, we mentioned it to some degree here, but we haven't really kind of gone into more detail. So, Robert, could you, especially at the data center, the size of your organization, and maybe we can get some of the other panel members to talk about that, but how do you deal with that, and how do you overcome that? Because that's one of the biggest fears that we have is, are our jobs going to be outsourced?
Sure. Thank you. And I think we had a good lead-in from our last speaker regarding outsourcing and change that's going on. I think, as you look at Government Code 19130, state departments are directed to leverage state resources wherever possible, and we go through great efforts to try to ensure that we're meeting the spirit of that law. But at the same time is we recognize that in some instances the resources just aren't available. So what's happening in industry is, I think, a place I'd like to start is we're moving to that, what they call the third wave of computing. This is a major industry change, so it's not just state, it's the world. And as I look at that, I share with people that story, and I talk about how change is sometimes difficult for people, but change also brings new opportunities. It opens new doors for new types of positions. I've yet to see a cloud architect in the state, but I imagine within the next 2 years, we'll have many cloud architects. There's very few solution architects, but if you look in the private sector, they have many solution architects. In fact, some are here today in this conference as part of our vendor community. Also, too, is I see teams of people, so matrix organizations that work closely within the departments themselves, and OTEC providing resources, state resources, that work directly with departments on site and can understand their business problem and can help them both from a business perspective, but then from a technical perspective, driving out solutions. So as I see it is, we as executives need to leverage our staff and be part of the planning of all this work that needs to happen. And that's something we're doing now at OTEC. We've actually brought on recently a consulting firm to help us with organizing and facilitating the conversation with many staff in the organization, as well as executives, to understand where are we headed. Where are we headed as an organization, not just OTEC, but the entire CDT, and being able to leverage our resources in the most efficient way possible, because that's what the taxpayers want.
Very cool. And I have spent some time at CalPERS, and I have to tell you, it's a very employee-rich environment as far as employees and concern about their employees. So, Liana, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit on that one, too. Can you address the elephant in the room?
Oh, regarding outsourcing. Well, one thing I have to say, we are also a very union-friendly organization. We believe that you bring them in early and you have consistent conversations. We actually have monthly conversations with, we call it the Joint Labor Management Committee, and so it's extremely important to get them involved. We've started developing apps with them in mind, and also called Illuminate, and then some of the other things that we're doing in relation to going to email and considering software as a service. The big thing is the union is there to protect the staff. And I was just mentioning, out of the 6 that I deployed it's actually been, I said 12 months, but it really has been more like 6 months. I have not had a reduction at all in staff. So what is important to realize is they just want to make sure that we're not reducing staff, that it's not in replacing staff. This is about giving people a career opportunity, having cloud architects, opportunities that people would not have had otherwise. And so just having that conversation early is extremely important. And like I was saying, we have a gym at CalPERS, and so I was down working out, and one of my employees came in and says, "Can I just talk to you for a second? I'm working out with weights." I go, "Oh yeah, sure, whatever you." And he just says, "I hear that we're really adopting this cloud strategy. Am I going to lose my job?" And he's a server admin, and one that tells you a lot that he felt comfortable enough to come and ask me about that, and I thanked him. But that fear is something we have to deal head on. And so one of the things we look at is taking people like that and changing them from people that are fear and have them being advocates, because there is a place for them, and it's just a different type of skill set. And I think once you acknowledge that and make sure that they understand what their role is, we have infrastructure service at Azure, And we do all the monitoring, we do all of the patching. It's just basically a place to house our servers for investment. So it wasn't like it was replacing what they were doing, but I'll tell you, and I think it was you, Robert, that mentioned lack of communication creates fear. And sometimes we don't have all of the I's dotted and T's crossed, and as CIOs, we're afraid to share information. And I think the sooner that you get out that you are considering it and how you're going to do it in a manner that protects the staff, that involves a union, I think you end up having a lot more adoption and you deal with that elephant. Because you don't want to be the blind person figuring out is it the trunk or the tail, right? You want to get ahead of it. And that's why, it's really a self-reflection. As someone in IT, do a self-reflection. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, is this something I'm embracing? Or is this something I'm not embracing? And if not, why? And if you can start there, I guarantee you the fears that you are having, magnify that multiple times with your staff. So I really believe strongly that that's what that helps you kind of get through that fear.
So you know how CIOs always tell you they have an open door policy? Well, this gives meaning to a new open door policy. Go up to her and she's on the bench press, lat machine, just ask her a question. Totally open door. All right. Before we get to QA, I think what we want to do is just kind of listen to the three panel members and have them kind of maybe talk about maybe 2 or 3 things, pearls of wisdom, that reflecting back on the areas that we covered and kind of your own experience. And a lot of times it's easier to be the Monday morning quarterback, but now that you've gone through it, pass on some of your wisdom. So we'll start with you, Jason.
I'm glad you started with me, so nobody else can take them.
So we won't have any more pearls by the time we're done.
Actually,
Okay.
the 2 things I want to leave you with have been said by all of us, is acknowledge the FUD, acknowledge the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and don't ignore it or gloss over it. The second is, Liana just said this, include staff in the development of a cloud strategy to address the fears, and also to get all of the wisdom that they present from their business verticals, from their IT knowledge and experience. And I think that again, in my early preliminary journey, it seems to be effective in smoothing out the transition from what I described as a cloud-cautious organization to a cloud-first strategic organization.
We brought him over. Did you feel that? All that shift?
Oh, yeah. I'll get you a bow tie next week. All right.
I'll send one over.
All right, by the end of the day, you're probably going to get that one.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, Liana. Go ahead.
I just want to remind individuals that the cloud is a business decision. I think we get caught up in it being a platform decision. I think that is where we end up creating some of the FUD, the fear. And if you're just doing it as a solution comes to you and then looking at it from an alternative perspective, you're in a reactionary mode. And it's almost like, well, now are we ready? Versus establishing that strategy at the business side and governing that. And I mentioned decision-making principles. Get those established up front. What is the risk appetite for your organization? What are things that are fairly, easy wins? Learning management systems. Do we need to really all build our own, or is it nice to be able to have something like that in the cloud? And I know Caltech is looking at making that an offering. So, it just look for those opportunities, and I think that'll just start iteratively. And again, just the buy-in. It's extremely important to work with your staff. And I do brown bags, and I get staff during a lunch period talking about things. We've talked about mentoring. What do we want to do related to mentoring? And this is another great topic to just bring out to your staff and see what their fears are so you can address them. Because it's not the problem that I'm worried about, it's the problem that I don't know about. And if staff are fearful, someone coming up to me in a gym to ask me that question, then I'm not doing my job and getting that communication out. And that allowed me to realize I needed to get more have that dialogue with staff, and that they feel like they're a part of the journey. So those are my pearls of wisdom.
Excellent pearls. So I'm gonna
I don't have any pearls on.
Where are the white pearls?
I'm gonna just expand on that a little bit. For me, it was about that elephant in the room conversation, very similar to what I heard. Have that early, and have it often. Make sure everyone understands that. Be open and listen to your staff and get their feedback on what's going on. And I'd say second is involve your staff and management team with the planning. have them part of the solution, and have them understand that they're part of the solution. Have them help strategize where you're headed for the next 3 to 5 years. Have them help you build the roadmap. At the very least, have them critique the roadmap. And that's something we're doing at OTEC now. We're actually building a 3 to 5 year technology roadmap. Understand OTEC is a very complex organization with many different environments. And I myself don't understand all the different environments we have, so I need to be educated. And I see it as a great opportunity to leverage our community. That is, not just OTEC staff, but also our vendor community. Understand what are the new technologies out there that we're not even aware of yet. And so that's where what I like to do is involve as many people as possible with the time I have to provide that input to make sure I have an effective solution for the next 3 or more years.
Cool. So my take real quick on this, and we'll open up for questions, is cloud is not coming. It's here, okay? So, and we've been talking about it for probably 10 years or more about the cloud. So we know it's coming. My take is also have some say in how you want to go instead of having it done to you. So have the roadmap, plan it out, kind of have some control of your destiny and how you want to change and transform your organization and be seen as a strategic business partner. That doesn't mean that you don't give up your responsibility. You don't, as far as managing and holding the cloud vendor accountable. And no different than if you had to have an exit strategy, if it's not working out, you move on to a different cloud provider if that's what it takes, if you're not getting the services and performance. You still don't advocate that responsibility. It still stays there. And then more importantly, your organization, if you've been in state service for a while, I can guarantee the organization that you're in today is not the same organization it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We're constantly changing, technology's changing. This is just one more piece of the technology and where it's going. But it doesn't, you still have a core business, whatever department you're in, if it's franchise tax board, CalPERS, food and ag, consumer affairs, that core business will always remain the responsibility of that department. That's where the services and with the IT that you're going to deliver is core to that department, and that will always be there and never be outsourced. So just think cloud is one of many overall integrated strategies into your overall approach and how you support your programs and your business. We have about 5 minutes. We'd love to get some questions to the panel members. And is there a mic?
Yeah, there are 2 mics.
2 mics? Do we have a Robert or George? No, all right. Shoot. And please address who you want to ask the question.
Anyone could take this, but how would you address costing, right? What were your considerations for, kind of how does costing play a role in your decision making? That was one. And the other one, I just wanted to piggyback on what Joe just mentioned. What is your rollback strategy in case the vendor doesn't work out for you?
So one is cost is always something that a CIO can never get out of that conversation. So looking at it from a total cost of ownership perspective, what I mentioned is the hardware refresh. Sometimes we look at the one time and the ongoing, we forget that in 4 or 5 years, if we own the commodities, I have to refresh those commodities, and if I've spent multi-million-dollar getting those, I may not get that later, which may end up costing performance and other things long term. So really looking at it from an end-to-end, and I think that's about being strategic. So teeing up information in a way where they can look at, if we had it on-prem, what that cost would be, and the total cost of ownership for that versus a cloud-based solution. In some cases for us, it just didn't make sense because it really wasn't a service we should be offering. So we just then made sure it was more of an OpEx, not an OpEx, moving it to CapEx to an OpEx conversation, and then they can consistently see that this is how much we're going to pay every month or every year, depending on that service. And then I would just say be very, very cautious. I love lawyers, any lawyers in the room, and I love contract people because they get me out of trouble a lot. And part of it is building in those provisions that it's very clear. And I know actually Joe's negotiated these contracts as well. If you own the data And you have responsibility. If you decide at any point in time that you want to move to another vendor, you build it into your agreement that the current vendor is responsible to help you to migrate to the new vendor. So it's just making sure you're thinking about all that, because you need to be able to have backup plans. And having that relationship ahead of time, it also helps the vendor, because the vendor doesn't want to be surprised at the very end. They want to build that cost into your proposal at the front end. So definitely have that conversation and have that as part of your requirements.
One more question?
Just curious, how many of your 62, how many different service providers does that represent? And are any of them CDP?
So the question to the group was, of the 62, how many are unique vendors, and then are any of them CDT? So of the 62 that I mentioned, all of them are unique vendors, and 62 separate contracts. I'm going to say 61, because part of it, Office 365 is Azure and the software, so I'll do 61. And at this point, they're not at CDT, but one of the things that we look at, because we're kind of bleeding edge, as they move to Office 365 and do LMS, that as we do our renewals, it makes more sense then to get that offering from them. So we're always considering them. It's just the situation we were in specifically.
Sally?
The contracts, that sounds like a lot of work for contract people and IT people. Did you have to staff up for that?
CalPERS has its own spring-fed pool and vendor pools that have been authorized through the board, so we already have agreements, so we're staffed for that. And I know
we
that was a question.
we have one more real quick, but it is
Really
time,
quick,
so.
yeah.
yeah.
I think it's a quick question. I just was, for disaster recovery, is that something that's part of the cloud contract, or is that something that maybe you would contract with a separate cloud vendor for? How does that work?
So this is Rob from OTEC. It's yes and yes. So we have services for disaster recovery today, depending on the platform, the environment. We'll be happy to talk to you about that. In fact, if you come to me afterwards, I can share more on that. And also too is understand that DR means many different things to many different people, as well as backup. We're actually working in this area right now, and we encourage you to work with us as to your requirements as we're building out a contract right now. Thank you.
Okay, so real quick, thank you, panelists, very much. Robert, Liana, Jason, and Joe, thank you. And there were two individuals in the background. We have Amira Manufi, and we have Mike Cooper that helped as well. So thank you very much as well. All right. Enjoy the show.